Hi, I'm Dave Stokes. I'm an ecologist at University of Washington Bothell, and welcome to St. Edward State Park.
I'm Susan Carlson. I've been a member of the community for about 6 years, and ever since we moved out here, I've been advocating to consider this park as an amazing place of learning about the ecology and environment, and to create a better and stronger sense of environmental ethic among visitors. We are launching the St. Edward Environmental Education and Research Center in partnership with the University of Washington Bothell and State Parks. It is among the only university-led environmental learning centers in the country, and it's super exciting.
St. Edward State Park is located in Kirkland, Washington, along the northeast side of Lake Washington. It is made up of 326 acres with 3,000 feet of freshwater shoreline. Originally, this land was inhabited by many native tribes, similar to the rest of the Seattle area. The St. Edward Seminary was the vision of Seattle's first bishop, Edward O'Day, who moved the Catholic diocese from Vancouver to Seattle. St. Edward was the first fully accredited seminary in the U.S., and State Parks acquired the building and site in 1977 after enrollment in the school declined. Development of the St. Edward State Park Native Plant Learning Garden, located in the forest island of the north parking area at the park, will include over 25 native trees, shrubs, and other species found in the park. Modeled after a native plant camera phone tour on the Utah Bothell and Cascadia College campus, each plant found in the forest island will be identified with a tag including a QR code directing users to plant profiles on the EERC's website with information including natural history, restoration ecology, and traditional indigenous uses of the plant. Once open in mid-April, the Native Plant Learning Garden will provide park visitors with a new opportunity to learn about Western Washington native plants before embarking into deeper reaches of the park. The project has been a collaborative effort between the EERC, UW Bothell, Washington Native Plant Society, Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, Friends of St. Edward State Park, and Washington State Parks. Join us on a tour of the natural aspects of the park and the valuable resources that they provide. As we walk through the park, Dr. Dave Stokes will point out the unique ecological features of the park.
So that's looks like an old cedar that was cut in the logging of the late 1800s. You can see the notch that's been hammered into it. The loggers would notch a tree like that, put a board in it, and then stand on the board to chop the tree down, either with a saw or with axes, a crosscut saw, misery whips as they used to call them. But you can see stumps like that. They're generally cedar stumps because they tend to be preserved better. Throughout the park, you'll see them occasionally with those notches. That's not a particularly large one, but there are much bigger ones.
This forest has a great variety of native forest types and conditions, with different tree species dominating the upper canopy and producing varying light conditions on the forest floor. These varying conditions allow a diversity of ground cover species to flourish. Although the forest is not true old growth as it was cleared in the late 1800s, it has been largely unmanaged since that time, and through the natural processes of ecological succession over the intervening 130 plus years, it has begun to take on many old growth characteristics. Some of these are a wide range of tree sizes, including very large trees, numerous snags or standing dead trees, abundant epiphytes, and diverse fungus species. Less visible than the physical structures of this maturing forest are the fascinating and complex processes and interactions between species that occur there. For example, The large Douglas firs attain their great size in part through associations with beneficial fungal species. These fungi also serve as food for the park's diverse small mammals, such as the flying squirrel and the Douglas squirrel, who return the favor by dispersing spores of the fungus throughout the forest, ultimately benefiting the trees as well.
Yeah, so this is just a really great example of western hemlock in a really typical situation for it. It likes to establish on dead wood. This is another function of all that dead wood. Here we've got western hemlock on what is probably a stump left over from the logging at the end of the 19th century. And the hemlock seedlings seem to do really well on that kind of substrate. And you'll often see them popping up by the hundreds, really, on a rotting log. It's a place where there's plenty of moisture, the seedlings can stay moist, and they can survive. The problem is they're far from the soil, so when they get big, they need to reach their roots down, as this one's doing, and to access soil, water and nutrients. So there was some additional removal of trees in the view shed from the seminary to the lake. But this is a perfect place to see. You got the big Douglas firs in the canopy, right? That's over 100 feet tall, and then coming up underneath is a western hemlock and western red cedar. The trees that have been persisting here for a long time and can continue to grow in the shade. And ultimately, they will dominate the site, but if there's no disturbance, once the Douglas fir reaches the end of its life, which could be 500 years, then those other species can become the dominant canopy species. First of all, this is a really big cedar, right? So it's just a gorgeous tree. Its lean makes me a little worried. But what's really cool to me as a wildlife person is the holes that have been made by the red-breasted sapsucker in the trunk here. Sapsucker will perch on the trunk and drill these holes, and that causes the tree to produce sap, and the sapsucker will come back and drink that sap and also eat the insects that are attracted to the sap. It's also a good example of when you get really old trees, you oftentimes get these cavities that are absolutely critical for wildlife dens. A lot of species use these kind of cavities to
A diverse variety of animals may be found in St. Edward State Park, including deer, bald eagles, raccoons, coyotes, bobcat, and more.
The hallmarks of St. Edward is all of the standing deadwood, the snags, and the downwood of various stages of decay. That's an old growth feature. As we said, this is not an old growth forest, but it's beginning to take on the characteristics of old growth. And this is a perfect example, a log that's almost decayed into the ground. This can provide, so you've got this hollowed out trunk. You also have the fungus growing out of the tree. It's trees like this that make St. Ed so valuable for wildlife. And this is a real resource for nesting, for roosting, for food, but you need to have these big trees to provide that kind of habitat. And there in the back you can see a snag that a woodpecker's been working on.
Invasive plants are a huge consideration for the success of a forest due to their ability to take over and choke out native plants. This is why conservation and restoration teams work to remove invasives wherever possible.
She's invading the park, English holly. It's got these really sharp pointed leaves, not very pleasant to grab onto. And here you can see the red berries that it produces. Birds will eat these berries, fly off, regurgitate the seeds. Then the seeds are planted. They can remain dormant in the soil for several years. And then wherever that bird regurgitated those seeds, you may get a new holly plant. And that's why holly is really spread throughout the park. And right now the park is trying to eradicate it because underneath holly, I don't know if you can see under there, but there's virtually nothing growing. It just chokes out everything, all the native ground cover that would occur there. So the park is trying to get rid of it. It's a particularly insidious invader because it can come up in deep shade. So it's really shade tolerant. A lot of non-natives are not shade tolerant, but English holly is. Same thing as the holly. It's, you know, dominating the site. Nothing is growing under, well, we do have this one sword fern growing here, but otherwise nothing growing underneath it. And because it's so shade tolerant, it can exist perfectly happily under the forest cover, unlike a lot of other weeds. And because it's so damaging to native plants, we're trying to control it. This ivy is, this English ivy will spread. It's another shade tolerant plant. It forms these dense mats. In this case, the osoberry has managed to get through it, or maybe the osoberry was already here before the, that's probably more likely, the osoberry was already here before the English ivy got going. It tends to spread vegetatively when it's on the ground like this. When it climbs a tree, I'm not seeing any trees, but when it climbs a tree, it then produces flowers and berries, and then that's when it's dispersed by birds.
Follow the forest trails down to the water, where you'll find a beachside oasis to take a break and have lunch. Thank you for joining us on a tour of St. Edward State Park to learn a little bit more about its ecology and history. We encourage you to stop, look, and listen while in the park. You'll never know what you'll find. We'll see you on the trails.